The information discussed in this PILCast episode are merely opinions and do not constitute formal policy or legal guidance of any kind.
Hello, and welcome to another PILCast episode, the series where we discuss federal procurement innovation topics in 10 minutes or less. We guarantee it. I'm David Jablonski with the DHS Procurement Innovation Lab.
And I'm Scott Simpson, also with the DHS PIL.
So in today's episode, Scott and I are going to talk about adding optional evaluation factors as part of an evaluation approach in one of your future solicitations. So Scott, what are optional evaluation factors?
Well, optional evaluation factors are just like the name applies. It is an evaluation factor that is optional, as in it may or it may not be used. For instance, you might have 3 evaluation factors plus price, but your solicitation states that there is an optional 4th factor. Now, when you release your solicitation, vendors do not respond to that 4th optional factor. It is only at the government's discretion that they say, hey, actually, I think that I might need this. We are going to go ahead and use the optional factor. We'd like the vendors to write to or participate in this kind of factor. It is a really great opportunity for you to have a backup factor. If you think there might not be enough in the first couple of factors to really make a differentiation for your award. For instance, if you're kind of worried that everyone's corporate experience in phase 1 and everyone's technical and management approach in phase 2 might be kind of vanilla, and you're worried that everyone's going to come in at either high or some confidence and that you won't have enough gradation, you can include an optional evaluation factor. Maybe it's an oral presentation that you think, hey, I know that if I have this factor, if I get down to that factor, that I've got some great things going on there, and I'm going to have that, and it's going to be great. And it's going to give me what I need to make an award. But there's a possibility I don't, and I'm just going to go on my first, actual, we'll call them mandatory factors here, the non-optional factors.
That's great. And so now for everyone out there, you can use this optional evaluation factor technique in any part of the FAR as well. So that could be 8.4, FAR Part 13, 15, and also 16.505. So you have places you can use this anywhere, which is great. And that's what we want to do, provide you all with a tool that can be a flexible use in your solicitations if you find that you need it. So Scott, do we have any projects that you're aware of that we've used, actually anyone's used an optional evaluation factor in?
We do, David. The Enterprise Financial Management Systems Project. That's EFIMS for short. So as you can see on the screen here, EFIMS used an optional site visit as the optional 5th factor there. They weren't sure whether it was going to be needed or not, but they wanted to include that just in case. They were doing a really big project. They wanted to have the option, the possibility of going out to the vendor's location and looking at that site in case they needed it to make their trade-off decision. Now, what ended up happening here is that they did not end up using that optional factor. They had enough information in their main factors to make that trade-off decision without going out to see their see that site visit, but they did have it in there. Another nice thing to know about that, right, is that if the optional factor is in your solicitation and someone wants to protest that, they have to do that at the solicitation phase. If they wait until the end and protest at the award phase, the GAO is most likely going to say, you're protesting at the wrong point. You had problems with the terms and conditions of the solicitation. You should have submitted that before the solicitation responses were due. And at that point, you could say, okay, well, I'm just going to do corrective action real fast. I'm going to make my optional factor required, or you can take the whole thing out and just keep moving. But to date, we have not had a team that has had that protest. So fingers crossed, we're keeping to move forward. David, there's a lot of other possibilities for using this factor besides just EFIMS. What do you think?
That's right. And so we have thinking about this and using this optional factor could be used for the betterment technique potentially, and oral presentations, interviews like Scott was mentioning, maybe in a phase one, an optional interview, a phone interview or a virtual interview. Use case studies technique potentially as part of this. Product demonstrations, just like it was shown here with the site visit for the eFIMS team as well. So there's other potential applications that can be done with this technique, and maybe you all can think of some additional ones as well.
Now, one thing to point out is that if you're using an optional evaluation factor, you have to be fair when you're using it. And so you would apply that factor to all of those vendors that submitted quotes. So for instance, if you had a phase one optional evaluation factor of a phone interview or an MS Teams interview now, you would have to include all of those vendors that submitted a phase one response in your optional evaluation factor. But that could be really rich for you if you just didn't have enough differentiation in the whatever your factor was, corporate experience, and you wanted to have that phone interview to help make your decision about which vendors to advise to move into phase two. And the same if you had it in phase two, if you had an optional oral presentation or an optional site visit like they did in eFIMS, you'd have to include everybody who submitted a phase two response when you're using that optional criteria. Now, it is possible that you could use it as an optional down select too. I think that's something that's really interesting that we could talk about more. But please, before you do that, give us a call. And David, what happens if you decide, I don't need to use this optional factor?
Well, if you don't need to use something that's optional, then you just don't use it and you continue with your evaluation strategy that you had already outlined in the requirement itself. And that's it. Well, Scott, I think that about does it here for this episode. If you're interested in using an optional evaluation factor in your next procurement, reach out to our team, send our PIL team an email, and we will help work with you on it with your requirement. Let us know what you think about this episode in the comments. Please like this video, share this video with your friends, subscribe to our channel, check out all of our other videos on federal procurement innovation techniques, and hit that notification button so you get all of our latest updates. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.